Imagine a creature so terrifying that looking into her eyes could be the last thing you ever did. No sword could save you. No armor could protect you. One glance, and your body would become stone. Her hair was made of living snakes. Her face was feared by warriors and kings. And yet behind this terrifying monster was a story far more complicated than simple evil. Her name was Medusa. But who was she really? Medusa was one of the three Gorgons of ancient Greek mythology. Her sisters were Athena and Euryale. The three were terrifying creatures associated with the far reaches of the mythological world. But Medusa was different. According to the ancient mythographer known as Apollodorus, Medusa was the only mortal Gorgon. Her sisters were immortal. Medusa was not. And that single difference would eventually determine her fate. But there is another important detail. Not every ancient source tells the same story about Medusa. In the older Greek tradition, she is presented as a Gorgon. But centuries later, the Roman poet Ovid created a very different version of her origin. And that version transformed Medusa from a monster into something much more tragic. Medusa's appearance became one of the most recognizable images in mythology. Instead of ordinary hair, living snakes twisted around her head. Her face was terrifying, and her gaze was deadly. Anyone who looked directly into her eyes would be transformed into stone. This power made Medusa different from almost every other monster in Greek mythology. A warrior did not need to fight her. He only needed to make one mistake. One look. One moment of eye contact, and the battle was over. This is why the statues surrounding Medusa's home were so frightening. They were not simply decorations. They were the remains of those who had failed to avoid her gaze. But Medusa possessed another strange power. Even after she was killed, her head retained its ability to turn living beings into stone. And eventually, that terrible power would become the weapon of the hero who killed her. But was Medusa always a monster? This is where the mythology becomes complicated. In the tradition recorded by Apollodorus, Medusa was already one of the Gorgons. But the Roman poet Ovid tells a different story. According to Ovid, Medusa was once extraordinarily beautiful. Her hair was particularly famous. She was admired for her beauty until Poseidon, god of the sea, encountered her in Athena's temple. The encounter became a violation of the sacred temple, and Athena's anger followed. In Ovid's version, Athena transformed Medusa's beautiful hair into living serpents. Her beauty became terror. Her hair became snakes, and her face became something no mortal could safely look upon. From that moment, Medusa became the creature everyone feared. But this difference between ancient sources is important. The story of Medusa as a beautiful woman transformed into a monster comes primarily from Ovid. It should not be treated as the only original Greek version. Instead, it shows how the Medusa myth evolved over time. Years later, a young hero named Perseus received an impossible mission: bring back the head of Medusa. The man who gave him this command was King Polydectes of Seriphos. Polydectes wanted Perseus gone, and he believed Medusa would kill him. But Perseus had something most warriors did not have: help from the gods. Athena gave Perseus a polished bronze shield. Hermes provided him with divine assistance and weapons. Perseus also obtained magical equipment, including winged sandals, a special bag to carry Medusa's head, and the cap of invisibility. But before he could reach Medusa, Perseus had to discover where the Gorgons lived. He sought out the Graeae, three mysterious sisters who shared a single eye and a single tooth. Perseus seized their eye and forced them to reveal the route to the Gorgons. Eventually, he reached their remote home. The landscape was silent. The ground was covered with stone figures, warriors, travelers, animals. And inside a dark cavern, Perseus finally saw Medusa. She was asleep, but even sleeping, she was dangerous. One direct look would kill him. So Perseus did something no ordinary warrior would have thought to do. He never looked at her directly. He watched her reflection in Athena's polished shield. Slowly, he approached. He raised his sword, and, guided by Athena, he struck. Medusa was dead. But killing Medusa was only the beginning. Her sisters awakened. Stheno and Euryale discovered what had happened. They searched for the killer. But Perseus had another divine advantage: the cap of invisibility. He disappeared before they could find him. Perseus escaped carrying Medusa's head inside a magical bag. But the head still possessed its deadly power. Anyone who looked directly at it could still become stone. During his journey, Perseus encountered Andromeda. She had been chained to a rock as a sacrifice to a terrifying sea monster. Perseus confronted the creature, but instead of relying only on his sword, he used Medusa's head. He held it toward the monster while looking away. The creature looked at Medusa and turned to stone. The monster that had once been Perseus's greatest threat had now become his most powerful weapon. Perseus eventually returned to Seriphos, but King Polydectes still refused to believe that he had succeeded. So Perseus showed him the proof: Medusa's head. Polydectes looked at it and became stone. Perseus had completed the impossible mission. But Medusa's story did not end there. Perseus eventually gave her head to Athena. The goddess placed the image of Medusa upon her sacred shield or breastplate. The face that had once represented terror now became a symbol of divine protection. And Medusa's death became one of the most important transformations in the entire myth. The monster had become a protective symbol. This is what makes Medusa so fascinating. She was not simply a monster. Her image represented fear, but it was also used to protect people from danger. The terrifying face of Medusa, known as the Gorgonion, appeared throughout ancient Greek art. It could be found on shields, pottery, temples, armor, and other objects. The idea was simple. If Medusa's face could frighten humans, perhaps it could frighten evil away too. Her story also reveals something important about mythology. Myths change. Different writers tell different versions. Different cultures reinterpret the same character. And Medusa changed dramatically over time. In one tradition, she is a monstrous Gorgon. In Ovid's version, she begins as a beautiful woman who is transformed. In later centuries, artists and writers interpreted her in countless different ways. Sometimes she represented terror, sometimes beauty, sometimes tragedy, sometimes female power, and sometimes the danger of looking directly at something we do not understand. Thousands of years have passed since the ancient Greeks told stories of Medusa, yet her face is still instantly recognizable. The snakes, the terrifying eyes, the stone victims, the hero with the polished shield. But perhaps the most interesting question is not how Medusa died. It is who Medusa really was. Was she simply a monster? Or was she a tragic figure whose story changed every time someone told it? Perhaps both answers can exist at the same time. Because mythology is not always about heroes defeating villains. Sometimes it is about fear, transformation, power, and the stories humans create to understand them. Medusa could turn anyone who looked directly into her eyes to stone. But thousands of years later, we are still willing to look at her. And perhaps that is the true power of Medusa. She doesn't simply force us to fear the monster. She forces us to ask why we fear it. And sometimes, the most frightening monsters are the ones whose stories we never fully understood. Medusa, the woman, or monster, whose gaze could turn the living into stone, and whose legend refused to die. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Drop a comment which monster wants to watch next.